This recording will provide a brief introduction to the basic concepts and the structure of local holdings records, also known as LHRs, for OCLC WMS libraries. This will include a review of local holdings record standards, OCLC MARC local holdings format and standards, locations, copies, and formats, LHRs for single-part monographs, LHRs for multi-part monographs and serials, coded versus textual holdings, and summary statements for serials. Local holdings records are based on two standards. Z3971 is a holdings display standard. It determines the conceptual elements and how they display. It is also referred to as the content designation. You can think of Z3971 as the guidelines for creating the content of local holdings records in the same way that AACR2 and RDA are the cataloging guidelines for the content for bibliographic records. MARC 21 format for holdings data is called a communication standard, and it's maintained by the Library of Congress Network Development and MARC Standards Office. MARC 21 format is also officially referred to as the record structure, as it defines the structure of holdings records so that the data can be communicated between different computer systems. So while Z3971 determines the content or what goes into the LHR, MARC format for holdings determines the record structure or where the content goes. Both standards are essential for creating and maintaining local holdings records. OCLC MARC local holdings format and standards is based on the Z3971 standard and MARC 21 format for holdings data. You can find the OCLC format for holdings by going to oc.lc/LHRFAS. While bibliographic records in WorldCat contain information about a particular manifestation of a work, for example, the title, author, ISBN, ISSN, and so on, LHRs contain specific information about the copy you own or the specific volumes and issues you own for a serial. Local holdings records are attached to a bibliographic record in WorldCat that meets the description for the item or items you hold. WMS libraries create an LHR for each copy, regardless of location. For example, 2 copies of a single part item, maybe a book, with the same shelving location or different shelving locations require 2 LHRs. 2 copies of a serial subscription for the same location or different locations requires 2 LHRs. You would also create an LHR for different parts of a multi-part item if the parts are shelved in different locations. The local holdings record will be linked to the bibliographic record. Several LHRs can be linked to a bibliographic record, but an LHR can only be linked to one bibliographic record. You would create a local holdings record for each format for an item, attaching it to either the same bibliographic record, for example, if the record is representing both a print and electronic copy of an item, or a print and a microform copy of an item, or you could attach the LHRs to their own format-specific bibliographic record. MARC format for holdings data is designed to be a carrier for holdings information for 3 types of bibliographic items that are identified by a code in the leader of the LHR. These types are described in the Z39 standard as well. So a single part item is an item which is complete in a single physical part, for example, a single map, a single score, a 1-volume book, or a computer file, and this would be a code X in Leader 06. A multi-part item is an item which is complete or intended to be complete in a finite number of separate physical parts. For example, a set of maps, a musical score with parts, a 10-volume encyclopedia, and so on. And this would be identified by code V in Leader 06. A serial item is an item issued in successive parts at regular or irregular intervals and is intended to be continued indefinitely. For example, a journal or a serial update service to a loose leaf publication. And this would be identified with code Y in Leader 06. WMS libraries will have local holdings records for all types of bibliographic items, both monographs and serials, at least for physical resources. LHRs for monographs can be single-part items or multi-part items. So these are some examples of single-part monographs. It could be an individual book or a resource in any format that is complete in one volume or one part. Multi-part monographs could include a multi-volume encyclopedia, a 3-CD set, a book with an accompanying CD, or a kit, for example, which might include various measuring devices, as in this example. The parts may all be equal, or there may be a primary part with an accompanying secondary part or parts. LHRs for serials can include bound volumes or current issues for a serial title you're receiving. At minimum, all OCLC local holdings records attached to a WorldCat bibliographic record contain a leader, an 007 field, an 008 field, and an 852 field. So let's look at the fields in a local holdings record, starting with fields for a single part monograph. So leader 05 is for record status, which will either be C for corrected or revised or N for new, and this is system supplied. Leader 06 for type of record indicates the type of item covered by the holding statement. And for a single part monograph, as we said earlier, this would be code X. Leader 17 is a code indicating the encoding level or level of specificity of the holdings. For single part monographs, the encoding level would be Z. Z, other level, is used for single part monographs with or without a barcode. And leader 18, item information in record, is a code indicating if the holding includes a barcode. So I would indicate that there is a barcode in the record, and it would be contained in fields 876 to 878. And N would indicate there is no item information or barcode in the record. 007 is for the physical description. The choice of the 00700 category of material will determine which additional character positions with their specific values follow. For example, 00700 category of material T for text will be followed with 00701 specific material designation with a choice of A for regular print, B for large print, C for braille, D for loose leaf, and so on. The 008 fixed-length data elements general information includes the 06 receipt or acquisition status, which for single-part monographs would most times be a 2, received and complete or ceased. 00816 for completeness must always be 4, not applicable for single-part monographs. 852 is for location. OCLC local holdings records are separate holdings records linked to a related OCLC bibliographic record. They report holdings information for a single copy of an item. For additional copies at the same location or another location, you would create a separate LHR. So the first indicator is for the shelving scheme that you use. And so it could be a 0 for Library of Congress, 1 for Dewey Decimal, and so on. Second indicator is shelving order. So it could be a blank for no information, 0, not enumeration, and so on. The 852 subfields include subfield A, which is your OCLC symbol, subfield B, a sublocation or collection, subfield C, your shelving location for the item, subfield H, classification number, and subfield I, the item part or cutter. That completes all of the minimum required fields for creating local holdings records. And for most single-part monographs, you may just need to add an 876, which is where you would enter a barcode in subfield P. This is an example of a local holdings record for a single-part monograph. The 300 field from the bibliographic record shows the physical description. And now you can see the local holdings record on the screen. And I've expanded the leader, and you can see the type of record is X for single part holdings, and encoding level is set to Z. Item information is an I, so there will be a barcode. I've also expanded the 008, and so you can see that completeness is set to 4, not applicable, which is appropriate for single part monographs. And then finally, there is an 876 subfield P for the barcode. Next, we'll look at local holdings record MARC fields that are used for multi-part monographs and serials. So the leader 05 record status would also be a C for corrected or an N for new, and that's system supplied. Leader 06 type of record would be a V for multi-part item holdings and a Y for serial item holdings. Leader 17 for encoding level would have 3, 4, and 5 for the codes for multi-part monographs and serials. Holdings level 3 includes summary holdings information, that is, holdings at the first or highest level of enumeration and chronology. For example, if you are recording just the volume and year for a serial. Holdings level 4 includes detailed holdings information, that is, the first and all subsequent levels of enumeration and chronology. For example, if you are recording volume and issue and month and year for a serial. Holdings level 5 would include level 4 detailed holdings as well as a barcode in subfield P. Encoding level Z could be used for items without enumeration and chronology, as is the case with some types of multi-part monographs. Leader 18, item information and record, would use code I for item information if a barcode is present, or N for no item information or no barcode. For the 007 physical description, keep in mind that you would code for the primary part if you are recording holdings for a multi-part monograph. For example, if you have a multi-part monograph for a book with a supplementary disc, you would record 007 for the primary part of the book. In an 008-06 receipt or acquisition status for a multi-part or serial item, you might record a 2 if it's received and complete. For serials, you would use code 4 if you're currently receiving the title, or code 5 if you're not currently receiving the serial. For completeness, you would code 1 for complete holdings, 2 for incomplete, and 3 for scattered holdings. 852 locations for multi-part monographs and serials would be recorded in the same way as you would for a single part item, with the first indicator, shelving scheme, and so on. Subfields for your 852 will also be recorded in the same way, with subfield A for your OCLC symbol, subfield B, sublocation, and so on. Next, I want to talk about 4 related sets of fields for multi-part monographs and serials for recording information about the items actually held. Captions and patterns and enumeration and chronology fields make up what is known as coded pairs, and these would be entered in 853, 855 for the captions, and 863, 865 for enumeration and chronology. Textual holdings can be used for multi-parts and serials as an alternative to the coded pairs, and these would be in 866 to 868. And finally, item information or barcodes, if applicable, are added in 876, 877, or 878 for OCLC WMS libraries. You would use the coded pairs, captions, and enumeration and chronology when possible, even if you have used textual holdings in the past. In serials issues management, new serials issues are added with the coded pairs. And you would use textual holdings when the materials can't be adequately described using coded pairs. For example, if you had a multi-part monograph without captions or numbering. So we'll go over the coded pairs first. 853 is where you would enter the captions for a basic bibliographic unit. First indicator and second indicator can be entered as 3 unknown and 3 unverified. For the subfields, the first one will always be subfield 8, which is the field link and sequence number. And for the first caption, and often the only caption you will have for the holdings record, this will be a 1. Subfields A to H are the enumeration captions, and subfield I to M are the chronology captions. And then to go with the 853 captions is the 863 enumeration and chronology for basic bibliographic unit. The first indicator is for the encoding level. Second indicator can be left at blank. For the 863 subfields, the first subfield will be subfield 8, which is the field link and sequence number. The first 863 you have will be a 1.1. The first one will link it back to the caption, the 853. And then the second one there is an indication this is the first 863. This would be followed if you had to add a, for example, second volume or second issue. This would be followed by an 863 subfield 8 1.2, the 1 linking it back to the same caption in the 853, and the 2 indicating this is the second 863. And then you would record the enumeration in subfields A to H, depending on how many levels you're going to have. And the chronology would be recorded in subfields I to M. And the coded pairs would use 876 if you're going to record a barcode for a basic bibliographic unit. Subfield 8, again, would be the first subfield, and this is the field link and sequence number. And again, that 1.1 is going to link the barcode to the first 863. This would be followed by subfield P for your barcode. And then if you have additional 863s, you would use an additional 876 with a subfield 8 1.2 followed by its specific barcode. So this is an example of coded pairs using 853 and 863 for basic bibliographic unit. These are two issues that I have here for a serial, volume 13, number 1 and 2, January and February 2022. The captions would be in the 853 field. You can see subfield 8 has a 1, my only caption field. Subfield A, I have the caption V period. Subfield B, I have the caption NO period. This local holdings record is recording holdings at level 4, all levels of enumeration and chronology. So you can also see for the 853 captions, I have subfield I for year and subfield J for month. These are in parentheses so that the actual word year does not display in Discovery, but the actual year, which will be in the 863, will display. 863 for the enumeration chronology, the first indicator. There's my indicator indicating this is for level 4 holdings. Subfield 8 is the linking field, so I have a 1.1 linking it back to the 853 caption. And the second one there indicates this is my first 863. Subfield A, I have a 13, the value for the volume. Subfield B, I have a 1 of value for the number on the issue. And then I've got a subfield I for the year and a subfield J for the date. 01 is for January. And the same thing for the second 863, I'm recording the second issue that I have there. Alternatively, if you choose to enter textual holdings, you would use 866 for a basic bibliographic unit. First indicator would be for the encoding level. Second indicator would be a 1 for the ANSI NISO Z39 standard. The subfields for the 866 field would first start with a subfield 8, which would almost always be a 0. Subfield A is where you would include your textual holdings statement. The 876 information for a textual holdings would start with subfield 3, materials specified, and that would be what you have in your subfield A of your 866 field. And this is an example of textual holdings using 866 and 876. Textual holdings is an alternative to coded pairs when you cannot adequately describe the holdings with the coded pairs. In this case, I have a multi-part monograph. It's in 2 parts. This is a piano and cello piece by Gabrielle Fauré, and the parts are equal, but they are not numbered. There's no enumeration and chronology. There is simply 1 piano score and 1 cello score. So for my textual holdings, I have 866 for both of them. I have 2 866s since they are both primary parts or both equal parts. The first subfield is subfield 8, and it's going to be followed by a 0. Subfield A is where I actually enter the textual holdings. And so I've just put in here 1 piano score. The second 866 would have subfield A, I've got 1 cello score. The 876 begins with subfield 3 for textual holdings, followed by what I have in subfield 8 for my textual holdings, 1 piano score. then I would enter a barcode in subfield P. In the examples that we've looked at so far, I've shown you how to create the holdings for coded pairs or for textual holdings for a basic bibliographic unit. But there are also holdings fields for supplementary material and for indexes. So you would need to consider the bibliographic record that you're using for these materials. You would use the fields for basic bibliographic unit 853, 863, or 866 for a volume or a serial or one volume book and so on, but you could also use it for an index or for supplementary material for which a separate bibliographic record exists. For supplementary material, you would use 854, 864 for the coded pairs, or 867. And this would be for additional materials for which the cataloging is included in the record for the basic bibliographic unit. That is, no separate cataloging record exists for the supplementary material. Indexes would use fields 855, 865 for coded pairs, and 868 for textual holdings. And this would be for indexes for which the cataloging is included in the cataloging record for the basic bibliographic unit. Again, that is, no separate cataloging record exists for it. So when creating LHRs, you'll need to consider the relationship of the local holdings record to the bibliographic record. First, determine the category of resource. Is it a single part, multi-part, or a serial? For a multi-part item, determine if all the parts are equal or if there is a primary part with accompanying materials. Next, find or create a bibliographic record that represents the item or items. It may represent the bibliographic unit alone, which may be a basic unit, a supplement, or an index, or it may represent the basic bibliographic unit and supplementary materials and/or indexes. For coded pairs, for a basic bibliographic unit, you would use the coded pairs 853, 863s for the caption and enumeration and chronology, and 876 for the barcode. For a supplement, you would use 854, 864 for captions and enumeration and chronology, and 877 for a barcode. And for indexes, 855 and 865 with an 878 for the barcode. So here's an example of a local holdings record for a serial using the coded pairs. This is for a serial being currently received. The leader type of record is coded Y for serial, and the encoding level is set to 4, all levels of enumeration. Note that it's not set to 5 since the current issues are not barcoded. Also, leader item information is set to N, no item information. And the 008 receipt status is set to currently received. This LHR is using the coded pairs for the basic bibliographic unit at level 4, recording all levels of enumeration and chronology. The coded pairs 853 with several 863s are used to record the detailed holdings of the issues. Note there is also an 854 for captions for a supplement, and there is an 864 for the actual values for that supplement. For textual holdings, if you're using them alternatively, you would be recording the holdings in 866, 867, and 868. The basic bibliographic unit would use 866 with an 876 for the barcode. Supplementary material uses 867 for holdings and an 877 for a barcode. And indexes, you would use 868 with 878 for a barcode. And this is an example of a local holdings record for a multi-part monograph, a book with an accompanying disc. You can see in the 300 field that there is a subfield E for the accompanying material, the audio disc. For the leader, type of record is coded V for multi-part. The 008 receipt status is set to 2 received. And completeness is set to 1 complete since I have both of the parts. I have an 866 for the primary part, which would be the book. And I have a subfield 80 followed by subfield A with 1V. Since there's no enumeration and chronology, This is a good example of when I should use textual holdings. I also have an 867, and this is for the accompanying material. So an 867 is the code for supplementary material or accompanying material. And I have subfield A1 sound disk. And then I have an 876 with the barcode, which is linked back to the 866 for the book, and an 877 for the barcode that I'll use for the sound disk, and that is linked back to the 867 for the sound disk. Summary statements can be created for serials and multi-part monographs. The summary statement should be a reflection of your institution's comprehensive holdings for the item on one LHR or spread out among several LHRs for different copies and locations. The summary statement can be created in Record Manager using the Build Automated Summary tool, which looks at 853, 863s, and 866 fields in the LHRs. Alternatively, you can create the summary statement manually. You will need to update the summary statement when your holdings change, except for currently received serials where the statement indicates you have open holdings. That is, you're currently receiving the item. This is a table 3.1 from the ANSI NISO Z3971 standard. And this is punctuation, which can be used for recording the extent of holdings and also for recording summary statements. I just want to point out a couple of the punctuation instructions here. There are many more than what you see on the screen, but the comma indicates a gap in your holdings. So you can see in this example, the comma after V period 1, volume 1, there's a comma followed by V period 3. So in this case, this indicates that volume 2 is not held. The hyphen indicates an unbroken range, or at the end of the holdings, it indicates open holdings, meaning still receiving. And at the bottom, the semicolon indicates a non-gap break. So in the example, you have volume 1 to 4 with a semicolon followed by volume 6. So the holdings do not include volume 5, but that is because it's what's called a non-gap break. The volume is not published. In this example, there are 3 local holdings records attached to one bibliographic record for different copies and locations and different formats, the print and the microform. So for this summary statement, the institution has holdings in some format at some location for Volume 1, 1990, and on. If you have separate records for different formats, you would have 2 LHRs for the print record, one for each copy at the main and the branch location, and the summary statement reflecting comprehensive holdings for the print would be Volume 5, 1995, and on. The record for the microform copy would just have one LHR, and the summary statement would be just a reflection of the holdings on microform. And that would be volume 1 to 10, 1990 to 2000. If you have additional questions, please go to help.oclc.org. From there, you can access documentation and training, and you can also click on the link Contact OCLC Support for help in your region. You can also go directly to find support by going to oc.lc/support. Thanks for watching.